All right, welcome back, everybody. I hope you're doing well. Hope we're kind of feeling good about where we're at. Obviously, we've spent a lot of time in the last few classes discussing the major content that you're going to need to include in those final papers. And what we're going to be doing in this week as we get ready to submit those rough drafts, which are due at the end of this week, is focusing our attention on something you've actually been working on as we've progressed. Specifically, we're going to be looking at the resources that you've been using in your references and your citations for both your introduction and hopefully, as we've discussed in last week's lecture, in your discussion sections as well. But I want to make sure that we dedicate a week to this particular process because even though a number of you have hit a home run with respect to the APA formatting of your citations and reference pages, a large number of people within the class probably needs to find a way to include some more resources as we get to the end of this paper and really fill out all the sections that we're going to need to fill out in the rough drafts that we'll be submitting. So what we're going to talk about today is not only what's expected in APA formatting, which is, again, something some of you still need to work on, even though a large number of you have taken care of that, but why this particular process is so unbelievably important. We're going to start just by looking at some of the rules around what you should be doing when you're citing and referencing information. And to cover those, we're going to go to the place that we most often go to in this class without our own manual in front of us, the Purdue website that goes over a large component of the kind of writing in APA format, citations and references. So we go to the website that's provided in the links for this week. I think it's actually been provided before as well, but included again. What you'll see within it are kind of listings, descriptions of what should be included in general when we're referencing and citing information. Now, this is a great description of how to reference these things appropriately. But one of the places that I like to go the most, just so we can see how this is actually laid out in a paper, is just an example paper that goes over all the specifics around what I should see in your citations and your references. And again, we've already referenced this paper before. We've covered it in previous classes, but I'm going to provide it for you again, just in case you need to kind of get quick access to it. And you'll see, again, not only a description of how a professional paper should be written in terms of the sections and the headings, with great descriptions in the notes on the side. But when we scroll down, what we can see is a great description of how to cite things appropriately, which is a really good, again, resource to reference a couple times. And if you go back to the rules, this helps. It really describes exactly what you're supposed to include. But I love the visuals. Allow you to see exactly how these citations are laid out. When if we go to the end, we'll see a reference page that breaks down all the things that you're supposed to be included on this page, which, as a reminder, should be broken away from the main body of the paper. And this is something that's covered here in the description. Right? Page break to the reference page with the title always of references, not the title of your paper or cited material or anything like that. And you'll see here very thorough overview of all the different types of resources that you could provide in your paper. Most of the references that you're going to be using, as we've discussed a few times, are journal articles. This is a journal article provided right up here, and this is, as you would expect, a very good example of the types of journal article references you should see. So you've got the authors listed first, the year of publication listed second. Note, it's not the year on last edited or last revised. It's the year that was published. And then the title with very specific rules as to what's italicized, what's capitalized, how it's supposed to be laid out, followed by the journal that it's written in, by the what is it, the journal number, and the issue number if it's in there. Sometimes they don't have issues, but usually they do. And you're going to have all of that information presented in, again, a very uniform way, followed by the pages that it's in, and the DOI link, which, as we talked about in previous lectures, is really important because this allows me as an instructor to find the articles that you wrote. So you've got to make sure that the DOI is listed correctly for these research articles. But more importantly, when you're using these for future papers and people want to read them, they need a proper DOI so they can quickly click on what it is that you have linked and understand whether or not you're describing the research correctly or the messages that these authors have correctly. You'll also see when you look at this reference page example, what a reference page is supposed to look like. You're seeing 3, 4, 5 pages of references included. This is very, very typical for research articles. When you do your senior thesis next semester or next year, it's a really good chance you're going to have 10, 20 references for that paper. I mean, that's standard for a good research article when you're an undergrad. And when you get further on, 10, 20 becomes 20, 30, 40 articles that you're going to have to reference just so you can really show the context around what it is that you're covering and really show an understanding of how the material should be organized in your head and the heads of readers as they're going through what it is you wrote. But more importantly, for this paper, we're not necessarily aiming for 10 to 20 references, but we need more than the 2 or 3 that some of you are providing right now. You should be aiming for at least 5 good resources on the topics that you're covering. Most of them, again, being journal articles with a select few maybe being websites or books or something that refers to what it is that you're looking at in your papers. But the vast majority of your work should come from those premier research art journals that we talked about earlier that cover stuff in a very thorough way and really are the things that contribute to the conversations that you're going to be a part of when you publish or just write your paper, not only for this class, but for future classes. I mean, obviously, we're working with made up data here. So you're not adding to a conversation necessarily because you don't have any real true data to work with. But you do that senior thesis and you're collecting real data and you are analyzing it. Your goal when you publish that paper is to contribute to a conversation on a topic or introduce a new topic within a conversation that's already been had. And to do that, you again need lots of resources, and you usually want those resources to be the stuff that's current, journal articles that are out there that are looking at the topics that you're interested in. There's one knock I do have on some of the references that you see here. A lot of the stuff listed here, because it's just an example paper, it's not necessarily a whole bunch of stuff that's actually being used. A lot of stuff is a little old. 1956 is a bit of a stretch as to how far you would go back for a journal article in these, or even a book. You'll also see sometimes books that seem kind of completely out of context listed here. Usually you'll see a theme with a lot of this stuff. I mean, most often we don't reference statistics books when we're writing our papers, unless we're doing a very specific statistical analysis that's new and you're kind of trying to argue why it's the best analysis for the paper that you're writing. But unless you are a stats buff and really doing some cutting edge analyses, that doesn't even necessarily need to be covered. Most of the stuff that you're going to be using in your references is either resources that allude to what it is you're interested in, or resources that allude to the tools that you're using for the study. So if you've borrowed a survey from somebody else, or you're utilizing a new kind of method of assessment, not necessarily the data analysis, but a new way of trying to collect data for something you're interested in, those things will probably be included as well. You'll have those cited in the methods section, but most of what you're going to be covering in those resources for this paper especially is that the introduction things that you've alluded to and the discussion section things that you've alluded to. I want to make sure that these are described correctly and these are put in the right order. Most of you are already there. Most of you just need to maybe clean up a few minor things or just add some more resources. But for some of you, there is some heavy lifting to do this week to make sure that this reference page looks correct and that you're citing things appropriately. Actually, that's probably the thing that's more problematic for a number of you. The reference pages look pretty good for the most part. I mean, and some people, I am not sure what we're using for a reference page. It sort of looks like you're just copying and pasting some random URLs. For the most part, where we're pretty good on the reference pages, it's the proper citations that sometimes are a bit of an issue. And this is actually another big thing that we want to make note of as we progress. When you are citing, there are specific rules as to how you cite stuff. Okay? When you're talking about an article extensively, there's a specific way to cite them first, and then you can continue talking about it without having to cite constantly. But if you're talking about specific statements or specific ideas, there's ways to talk about it and cite it in a proper manner. Where we're listing, say, years or authors' years or combinations of authors with years that kind of talk about an idea. And you want to make sure that you're doing it in a way that follows APA formatting. You'll note if you look at this sample paper, there aren't a lot of quotes here. It's not usually what citations are for in these papers. When you're writing these, people use their own words. They're not quoting person after person after person, but what they're doing is alluding to the work of others. They're referencing the ideas that they have and making sure that the readers know exactly how you're tying your topic to the context of these things that have been discussed. I mean, honestly, I think there's only 2 or 3 quotes included, and this is more just as an example of what you might do if you are needing to quote somebody directly. But if you go through this, the quotes, as you can see, are few and far between, and that's very typical for these articles. Very rarely quote people directly. You're just alluding to the topics that they're talking about and citing, referencing them correctly. If you need help with this, again, these are great examples, great summaries of exactly how to cite things in an appropriate way. You can see here, it talks about reference lists for each of the different sources. You can click on those. If you need footnotes and appendices, which I don't think most of you will for this one, this is what you could use here. And then again, if you need some help with those numbers and stats, you can see that here. We've covered pretty much though everything that you're going to need to worry about as you're working on this stuff. But if you do have questions after reviewing this video, you're still unclear on what you need for resources or what you're supposed to do to cite and reference, or at least what you're supposed to look at when you're trying to figure out how you're supposed to reference things correctly. What's the order? What are these numbers? What are they talking about with that? Um, Reach out. I'm happy to cover these things with you. Make sure that you're clear on it because this is a big component to these papers. I mean, it's here for ours, but this is a skill that you need to develop a lot because you really lean on this heavily for those senior theses. When you do have a whole bunch of resources that you're referencing and you're ensuring that you're covering stuff in a clear way that doesn't get you accused of stealing somebody else's ideas or misinterpreting what else is out there in the literature. So put some time into this because it really will help your understanding of this component of these papers. It's big as you progress. But in terms of the grand scheme of things, hopefully this is a manageable thing. Hopefully you can finish this early and give yourself enough time to work on those rough drafts, which, as you see in the calendar, are due by the end of this week as we're going through this specific topic. I know it's a lot of work to get that done, but man, once you're done with those rough drafts, technically you're kind of at the finish line for this class. One last assignment that we do where you just clean up those papers after you get some feedback. I mean, if you write a great rough draft, my feedback might be great. Just submit this again and you'll get full credit in the last section, which is wonderful. But wherever you get to after you're done with the rough drafts, we're really close to the end. Where there's going to be final versions of the paper that you're going to have to submit for even less points because the rough draft is really the heavy lifting. So I want to reward that with a lot of points. And making sure that this section, along with the other sections that we talked about before, are complete and the other previous ones that you've been working on are updated is big. So again, if you got questions about this, questions about anything, reach out. I'm happy to meet you during office hours or some other time since office hours kind of are a little late in the week, right when these things are due. So just send out a message and we'll try to figure something out so everybody can feel like they're up to speed on this second to last component of the class. But honestly, we're getting to the last component of the class when we start doing this. All right, that is it for today. Thank you very much for coming in. Hope everything's going well, and I will see you soon. Take care.